welcome everyone to Charlottetown, PEI for the Labour School of the Confederation of Canadian Unions. I appreciate everyone coming in today. As you notice, we have a couple guests that have introduced themselves, Dominic and I guess Jack's out of the room at the moment. We'll learn more about them tomorrow. First off, some housekeeping matters. The AED is upstairs to the left of the reception desk. In case of fire, exit, and we'll meet out front on the lawn by the hospitality room. And who are my safety officers in the room? Come on. Thanks, Lorraine and Scarlett. So if something happens, we'll clear out of the way and let them do their work. The first thing.
And Sean as well.
You as well. Sorry, Sean. Didn't see you over there. And Sean Campbell as well. So we'll get out of the way, get out of their way, and let them do their work. First off, we acknowledge that the land we gather, now known as Charlottetown, is located in Ipecacuit, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. The Mi'kmaq have lived on this island, stewarding its land and water and nurturing a profound spiritual connection to their traditional territories. We recognize their rich culture, vibrant language, and their significant contribution. The term Natukunuk is a concept that emphasizes sustainable resource management and living in harmony with the land. Taking only what you need, leaving enough for future generations, our connection to all living things, and the responsibility of mutual benefit. As we move forward, we are grateful to the opportunity to gather on this land and are dedicated to fostering respectful relationships with all Indigenous peoples. Thank you, Sean Campbell, for writing that. Okay, so this morning with us, our first Labour speaker is Anna Keenan, and she is from Fairvote, Canada, and is the representative from the PEI chapter. Anna, please.
I'm not seeing a huge number of familiar faces in the room, so can I just get a show of heads? Who's from PEI here? Okay, there we go. There's some familiar. Yeah, awesome. Okay, we've only got like 2 degrees of separation between everyone on the island, so nice to see you. Thank you. And so from all over Canada, who's from the West Coast? Yes, you've come a long way. Amazing. And then I imagine that we've got anyone from the province, the territories here? No? Okay. Can we see some Western Canadians, like in the interior, not the West Coast? So Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Quebec. Bonjour, merci d'être ici. And then we've got Ontario. Great. Atlantic provinces, not PEI. Awesome. Did I miss anyone? No, great. Okay, super. I also just want to get a sense of who I'm speaking to here. So how much, like, let's do it like this. If you know a lot about proportional representation, hands way up here. If you're sort of middling here, if you think you're a beginner, just hands down. Everyone, like, give me this. All right, so we've got a couple of people way up here. Anyone been involved with Fairvote Canada before? Amazing, thank you, super. Okay, so my plan today is to give, I'll just go through what's on the docket. We're gonna do a little bit of an experiment with voting at your tables as if we're voting for pizza in a first past the post system versus a proportional system. And it's a little group exercise where we can show the differences and outcomes from different voting systems. I'm going to talk a little bit about first past the post, our current electoral system, strengths and weaknesses, the results and the outcomes from that, versus proportional representation and why we advocate for electoral reform at Fairvote Canada and all of the various grassroots organizations across the country. I'll talk a little bit about the model wars, and I know because I'm speaking to a room full of union members that you understand the value of solidarity at a very fundamental level. And the model wars are basically people who fight about which version of proportional representation is best, and because they get so caught up in fighting between themselves about some really nuanced stuff where we lose sight of the big picture, which is just that any proportional representation model is better than what we have now. And I'll go through some of that. And then towards the end, I want to talk about the current political context that we have with this new Liberal government. I'm sure many of us are familiar with the last Liberal government's promise to make 2015 the last election under first past the post, and here we are 3 elections later, still with the first past the post system. So shame indeed. Thank you. So what can we do to, with this current political moment, do we have opportunities to change? Just to introduce myself a little bit, if you haven't picked up on my accent yet, I'm originally from Australia. I'm a dual Australian-Canadian citizen. I lived in, so I was raised there. I worked for environmental nonprofits there, and in Australia, the environmental movement and the trade union movement have been like this for a really long time. We talked about, I suppose back, around the time that I was born, there was a campaign there called the Green Bans, which was unionists working with the environmental movement to prevent exposure to environmental toxins at work. And so it was the union environment working with the environmental nonprofits to get bans on these toxic chemicals through strike action and all of this sort of stuff. And it was a really great campaign to be a part of. By the time I grew up and I was moving into my advocacy career after university, it was around the time An Inconvenient Truth was released. And so we were talking about, the fact that we need a great industrial transition in Australia at that time, in every country in the world as a whole, if we're going to meet this scientific reality of needing to decarbonize, and otherwise we will see huge impacts on people's quality of life around the world, and we can't escape from it. And that transition has huge impacts on workers. And so how do we need to build solidarity to support workers who are going through transition, to make sure that everybody is looked after as we're also taking care of the planet, because we can't have these two things being opposed to each other, right? We've got to find the solutions that are true for everybody. So that was sort of where I started out. I worked with the Queensland Public Sector Union in Australia for a little bit on climate action. I then traveled to Europe for a United Nations climate change conference, and there I met this incredibly tall, attractive Canadian man from Prince Edward Island. Fell in love. We lived in Europe for 5 years, where I worked for Greenpeace International, and Greenpeace did a lot of really great collaboration work with the International Trade Union Confederation, also focusing on climate action and industrial transition worldwide. And then when we decided we were going to settle down and have a baby, we came back to Canada via Montreal first, and then PEI, and I've lived here for 10 years. I imagine that many of you in the room are NDP supporters. I'm a Green here on PEI. I've got a lot of common cause with the NDP, obviously. And yeah, I've run in the last 3 federal elections, so I've experienced the ills of first past the post quite dramatically in my own career here. And later on this afternoon in PEI, we're actually going to be choosing a new leader for the Provincial Green Party, which will be a really exciting thing to watch. So that's a little bit about who I am. I'm currently working on public transit for the city of Charlottetown, so I'm officially nonpartisan now that I'm in this municipal government role. But one of the things I love about electoral reform is that it's good for everybody, no matter what party you're from. It's good for people, it's good for society. So I'm really delighted to be returning to this. I ran a big campaign here in 2016. I don't know if it sort of reached across the country in your national news, but we actually ran a plebiscite campaign where everyone in the province had the opportunity to vote for proportional representation or to stick with the current system, and we won it by a 10% margin. It was very clear, the results were very clear. But the Liberal government at that time said, oh, it was just a plebiscite. It was like a glorified opinion poll. It wasn't a referendum. And so they decided not to honor the vote. They did not implement change. They were very clearly under instruction from the federal Liberal, because the Liberals at that time were deciding not to follow proportional representation at the federal level. And if they had one small province following the will of the people and implementing that change, it would have looked very bad for the federal party. And after the provincial Liberals denied that progress in 2016 here on PEI, their popularity plummeted by 20%, which was just desserts. So anyway, there's all sorts of cool stuff. Looking forward to sharing with you. But first I want to start with an exercise to get warmed up. So you are each going to be, we're going to make a country here. This is the nation of the CCU, and we've got 6 ridings at these 6 tables. I think you've each got, some of you have 4 voters, some have 6, anyone have more than 6 up the back maybe? No? I think you're okay, you can still have 7. Did you know that in PEI we have about like 40% of the population per riding than the rest of the country? Because we're such a small province, and by a quirk of the Constitution, we get 4 ridings no matter what our population is. So per riding here, we only have about 40,000 voters, whereas in Ontario, you have 110,000, I think, so you guys can be PEI, this table of 4 over here. All right, what we're gonna do is run a first past the post election. We're gonna order pizza. We want to create a parliament of pizza, and each riding gets to choose 1 pizza, but you cannot divide your pizza into you can't have a half and half pizza. You only get 1 representative pizza per table, and we're going to choose our pizzas by first past the post. There are only 3 options. The options are vegetarian with green peppers, mushroom, onions. The other option is a meat lover's pizza with pepperoni, the ground beef, a little bit of barbecue sauce and bacon. And then the third option is Hawaiian with pineapple. You cannot remove any of the toppings, they are your choices. So please discuss amongst yourselves. This is a first past the post pizza vote. So you may only vote for one thing, and whichever gets the most votes, vegetarian, meat lovers, or Hawaiian, that's the pizza that your table gets. Okay? Please have a vote very quickly, and then you'll have one person report back what pizza your table elected.
You'll never get a stop.
Oh, sorry.
All right, that was the campaign period. Thank you, everybody. That was the 4 weeks of writ period and debate. So at your table, raise your hand if you want Hawaiian. Raise your hand if you want meat lovers. Raise your hand if you want vegetarian. Okay. So does every table know what they want now?
No, we have an issue.
You got a tie? Okay. If you've got a tie, just like in a real election, toss a coin, okay? I'll go around and I'm going to collect your voting reports. You guys got? Or meat lovers. All right.
Oh, we're all tied up.
Okay.
Well,
wait a second. 1, 4. You guys here? What was your report? Okay. And what were the votes? Just out of interest. How many people voted for meat lovers? How many? 3? How many people voted vegetarian? 2. And how many people voted Hawaiian? 1. All right. This table up the back. What was your result?
2 for Hawaii.
2 for Hawaiian?
3 for meat lovers.
Yep. Any vegetarian? Nope. Okay. Table up the back.
I thought majority ruled at the
Yep.
table.
Yes. What's the result?
Okay, so Hawaiian is majority rule.
Great.
Yes.
What was your vote division? Popular vote.
4 Hawaiian, 1 meat.
4 Hawaiian, 1 meat. This table up the back, what was your result?
Hawaiian.
Great. And your division?
4 Hawaiian, 3 meat.
4 Hawaiian, 3 meat. Okay, and this last table here?
We had meat lovers.
Yep. But ours was a split.
It was a split. So
Okay.
we had to flip it.
And then you tossed a coin. All right. All right. So let me quickly tally this up. Not a lot of vegetarians in the union room. Interesting. 12, 16, 17, and then you've got 12, 13, 14. All right. So I would like to report that the result of this election is that we have 4 meat lovers, that we have elected a majority government of meat lovers pizza, and we get an opposition of 2 Hawaiian pizzas. Congratulations. Okay. So, can I ask, at your table, who did get what they voted for? And I'm going to quickly count the hands in the room. So raise your hand if at your table, you got at your table, served on your table, what you voted for. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 people in the room got what they voted for. How many people do we have in the room in total? We must have 20, 33. All right. So I just want to point out, 15 people in the room out of 33, that's less than half, got the local representation that they voted for. This is very, very typical under first past the post. Most of you, so 18 people out of 33, did not get a local representative that you voted for. Does that feel like local representative democracy to you?
No.
No. All right. The end result, we got 6 seats, 4 meat lovers, 2 Hawaiian. So that's 4 out of 6, or 2/3, 66% of the population here wanted meat lovers, or 66% of the 66% of the parliament is meat lovers, and 33% is Hawaiian. But the actual percentage of people in the room who voted for meat lovers is 17 people out of 33. So that's just under 50%. Meat lovers did not have an absolute majority in the room, but we have an absolute majority meat lovers government, okay? And where are the 2 vegetarian voters in the room? So you guys are the Green and NDP here.
Yeah.
Yeah, you've got a green necklace, and you could be the NDP. So yeah, there is no representation for you. No soup for you. No veggie pizza for you. And and besides, like, who? Even though you ordered the vegetarian pizza, do you even like green peppers?
Yeah.
Yeah, you do. Do you like? No, exactly. But you had to vote for the green peppers anyway because it was the closest thing to what you wanted. And people who liked meat lovers pizza, maybe you don't like the ground beef and barbecue sauce, but it's the closest to what you want. This is sort of like what we have to do as voters. We can't just, we don't have a lot of choice. If you're only limited to 3 types of pizza and not the full menu, you don't get the nuance that you want in your order. And what we have in first past the post, we'll go into this a little bit more, is there's a political science law called Duverger's law. I think he was Duverger. I think he was French. But there's a tendency under first past the post to reduce and concentrate the number of political parties in the system. And particularly you see this in Canada with the federal Liberals and the federal Conservatives. They attract people who have very diverse political interests, and they sort of try to force them into one type of pizza or one political party platform, when you know there's actually big factions within those parties who have quite different views. And it's particularly important within the Conservatives right now. You've got the Reform and the sort of traditional Conservative Party of Canada folks, the more extreme right and the moderates. Under proportional representation, you could actually expect those 2 factions to separate again so that people could more accurately vote for which of those factions they want, rather than pretending that they're all one type of meat lovers. Great. So if we had proportional representation in this room, we didn't have enough vegetarians to elect any vegetarian pizzas still. Usually you require at least 4% to get representation of at least 1 seat. But with 33 people in the room and 6 tables, there should be about 5 or 6 voters for each pizza, right? And it basically would have ended up with 3 Hawaiian pizzas and 3 meat lovers pizzas. And then you would all actually have enough pizza to eat. So those people who wanted Hawaiian wouldn't be forced to. In this situation, we'd have about 3 people who wanted Hawaiian who couldn't go and get a slice of Hawaiian because it would have all been eaten. And you would have had to be forced to eat meat lovers because there'd be no Hawaiian left. So this is basically a demo in the room of first past the post versus a proportional system. So I really enjoy that little exercise. Thank you for indulging me in it. I'm going to dive into the last 8 provincial elections on PEI. So what we have on the, and I'm using PEI here because I could have used Canada, but it adds a lot of complexity. So I'll just share it at our provincial level. It's very simple. We have a legislature with 27 MLAs. It's the cutest legislature in Canada. And you can see that back in 1996, there was always a little bit of an NDP vote. And in 2007, the Green Party started getting votes. But there's only ever been one NDP representative on PEI. You can see that there was these huge swings. So even though just over 50% of the population voted Conservative, it was just over 50% in nearly every riding. So we had 26 Conservatives and 1 Liberal in 2000. Again, very extreme in 2003. And then a small swing of maybe about 15% of the vote resulted in a huge swing from 23 seats this way to 23 seats the other way between 2003 and 2007. It was in the middle of that there was PEI's first vote on electoral reform. The disproportionality continued with this apparent huge Liberal majority, even though they only just had a bare majority of support of the population. So these are sort of very ineffective oppositions here. We got the first Green elected here. Then in the middle of this, there was a by-election, so there was 2. And then in 2019, we got a very weirdly proportional outcome where, as you can see, no party had a majority. Still no NDP representation, even though there should have been one. But this was actually a minority government by 1. But then there were a couple of by-elections and they quickly got a majority government back, even though they did not have the support of a majority of the population. But then the premier was quite popular and he got just over a majority of support. And so the last election, we're back to this disproportionate majority. So that's an example in one province. Every province in Canada has the same story. And federally, we have the same story as well. Every 10 years or so, although we've just bucked the trend, we seem to throw our parliaments to the other one of the 2 major parties, and then about 10 years later or 12 years later, we throw it back to the other one. It's just ping pong between the 2, even though Canadian public opinion wavers only a small amount. What if we could have a more steady change and evolution in our politics rather than these big ping pong flip-flops like is typical under first past the post? And I think what we experience in Canada is typical of first past the post, but when we look to our neighbours to the south, it's even more extreme there. And we do not want to be going in the direction of what's happening south of the border. Even if the Democrats won this last election, we should still be aware and cautious of following an American 2-party model, following the logical conclusion of first past the post to its end, because it always risks, even if you get a government that you want or the least bad of 2 bad options, then you're always risking the next election that it's going to flip back. The results in majoritarian systems, and first past the post is one type of majoritarian system, is that we have exclusion of minor party voices. We have polarization into 2 major camps, And we have a culture of opposition between those two camps, where it seems like they can't agree on anything. And there's this incentive to fight against and to criticize your opponent in order to capture some of their vote share. In proportional systems, like in 45% of all the countries in the world, you see a culture that's more about negotiation between parties. It's more inclusive. There's more parties, so more diversity of voices, more accuracy in representation, and there's more collaboration between parties. There's less of an incentive to insult and criticize other parties. Instead, you're going to them to find where are the areas that we can agree on, and then you just agree to disagree on the stuff that you don't. This back and forth that I just talked about with flip-flopping between red and blue, it's typical of every country with first past the post, and it results in policy instability or policy lurch. So we sign on to the environment treaty, like the Kyoto Protocol, for example, and then we pull out. And then when it lurches back, we'll sign on again. That's climate policy has been a political football like this over the last 20 years I've been working on the issue and long before. We will cancel the long form census, then we'll bring it back, and then we'll cancel it again. It's these little things. We'll invest in the CBC, and then we'll defund the CBC, then we'll invest in the CBC again. We'll cancel veterans' monthly pensions, and then we'll restore them back to the levels they were at before, and we'll keep doing that. We'll lay off scientists and close programs, sometimes in the first year of a conservative government. And then we'll rehire scientists and reopen programs over many years of a more progressive government and try to rebuild those institutions. But because they get cut down every 15 to 20 years, it's impossible to have long-term progress over decades. We'll start community mailboxes, cancel community mailboxes. We see these sorts of policy lurch in all sorts of areas. And we go through this cycle. A party wins the majority government with about 35 to 40% of popular support. The government passes policy that is opposed by the majority of voters. The opposition parties campaign to reverse the policies. We have a divisive election campaign, and then a government is re-elected or a changed government with, again, 35% support. So we keep playing this game. And if we want a different outcome, we have to do something better. There was a slide full of examples of policy lurch and stories here in Canada. The hallmark of proportional representation is that in every election, there's a civil election campaign focused on the long term, and each party puts forward their policies. You elect a minority government. They do coalition negotiation, and you end up with a coalition government that genuinely has the support of more than half the population. Government then passes policies that are nuanced, that has the support of a majority of the population. The policies are popular. There's no incentive to campaign to repeal those policies, and they stay in place for decades and decades. And that is why we have seen countries in Europe, most of the countries in Europe have proportional representation with the exception of the UK. But those countries with PR, they talked about it and they passed laws for marriage equality earlier, and they've stayed in place, and there's no incentive to try to revisit these like identity politics, culture wars types of issues. They just pass it and it stays in place and it's durable for the long term. These countries acted on climate action earlier. They have better minimum wage laws. They have better workers' rights. They take the time to have slow, deliberative policy discussions that have a genuine support across parties. There's basically two families of, I talked a little bit about the model wars at the start. There's two families of systems. There's winner-take-all systems, which includes single-member plurality, which is it's another word for first past the post, where you have these small ridings and each riding or table elects one pizza, one representative. But other winner-take-all systems are called mixed-member majoritarian, the alternative vote, which is also known as instant runoff or preferential voting, where you rank your ballot. But it's fundamentally the same system. That's what they have in the lower house in Australia. Or the two-round system like they have in France. These are all majoritarian systems. that can give the illusion of better voter choice, but fundamentally still have all of the same outcomes that we've just talked about: policy lurch, division, polarization, a tendency towards two parties rather than diversity of voices. And then you've got proportional systems. Mixed member proportional with open lists have mixed member proportional with open or closed lists. We start to get into a lot of detail here. That's what Germany and New Zealand and Scotland have. That would generally be one of the models that's most recommended for Canada. There's the single transferable vote that's used in Ireland. It's used in the upper house because we have an elected Senate in Australia. Here there's no elected Senate, which I've always found bizarre when I moved here. But there's single transferable vote is another thing. Dual member proportional is a Canadian developed model that doesn't exist anywhere else in the world except for a very small province of Germany. List proportional representation is another type. It's often thrown up as a bogeyman. They have that in Israel and they have it in the Netherlands, two very small countries by geography. And it has higher degrees of party control. Literally nobody proposes list proportional representation for Canada because of our very wide geographic size and our regional differences. But opponents of proportional representation will often point to Israel or the Netherlands and say, you don't want a system like that. And we're saying, no, we don't want a system like that either. We do want proportional representation, but literally no one has ever proposed that specific model for Canada. Obviously, each of these would take like 20 minutes to explain in detail, and I don't think you need to worry about them, to be honest, but you can read a lot about them. We know how first past the post works. You put an X on your ballot, but you also have to do a calculation in your head before you place that vote. And this was especially strong in the last federal election. It's why my vote personally collapsed from I got 26% 3 elections ago to 14% 1 election ago to 3.5% this last election. I had hundreds of people telling me to my face, I think you're the best candidate, but I'm not voting for you because I'm afraid of Poilievre. And I had others telling me, I think you're the best candidate, but I'm not voting for you because I don't like 10 years of the federal Liberals, so I'm going to vote Conservative. So it was that sort of degree of polarization. So under first past the post, we have to ask ourselves, is it a safe seat? Does the same person get elected in this riding time after time, no matter how I vote for? If it is, then you can vote for whoever you want, but you sort of know it's a protest vote and it's going to be wasted. But if it's a marginal seat, you have to do this calculation. Could I split the vote and mean that the worst possible candidate wins? Could we get a Poilievre government? A lot of people were afraid of that this election. And then people have to do this math and say, okay, I have to vote strategically. And you have to inform yourself. You have to look at national polling. You have to look at riding projections. Who's likely to form government? Oh, there was a poll from 3 weeks ago, but what's changed there? And then you have to sort of strategically choose, okay, which of these parties do we elect? There was an example in Kitchener Centre where we lost a Green representative and the NDP lost dozens of representatives across the country because people strategically voted for the Liberal Party this time. And all of these voters were doing this, and they needed to vote in an insincere way. They held their nose and they put their X next to somebody who didn't represent their values because they were afraid. And that's exactly what first past the post makes us do. In proportional representation, it's so much simpler. You just vote for whoever you want. That's what it should be. So it seems very simple. Why should we change? We've already talked about this. False majorities, swing ridings get a lot of attention. If you're in a safe riding, your MP does not have to work to get your support. So that's a major effect that we get here. Pretty much all of PEI is safe, so the Liberal representatives here don't need to really go out and work for the votes. In Alberta, the Conservatives do not need to go out and work for those votes. Downtown Toronto, same thing. There's sort of those suburban belts around, the GTA and around Montreal, and that's where all of the election is decided. I think there was opinion piece that came out after this last federal election that said if 16,000 voters in like those two areas around Montreal and around Toronto, if they had changed their vote, we would have had a Conservative majority government in this last federal election. Just 16,000 voters. And so the political parties focus on those voters to the detriment of representation in the rest of the country. There's a lot of voting against. We've talked about that. Regional polarization. Now, this is the really interesting one. When we have a separatist movement coming up in Alberta and in Saskatchewan at this time. So this, it's just two little screen grabs that I got this morning. So this is how Toronto voted in the last federal election. 58% voted Liberal, 34% voted Conservative. The number would have been larger if it wasn't such a polarized, like, Carney versus Poilievre election. But it has sort of always tracked that Toronto has generally voted Liberal, but there's this very large proportion, like 1/3 of the city, 1/3 of the citizens in Toronto are Conservative, but we never think about that when we think about Toronto. Here's all the MPs that were elected. There was one Conservative out of 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So out of 24. If we'd had proportional representation, that region would have had 14 Liberals, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 Conservatives, and 2 NDP. In Alberta, they have, can you believe it? Nearly 1/3, well, more than 1/3 of Alberta are progressives, are center left or left. And we never think about that. We think that Alberta is, so who are the Albertans here? So may I speak about your province? So, no, Saskatchewan though. We've got some Saskatchewan folks. So we rarely think about the fact that we always talk about, and even that, Rosie Barton and all of the political commentators, they'll say, oh, we've got such deep polarization in our country where we've got progressives in the east and conservatives in the west, and that's just the way that it always is. But we forget, no, we've actually got a lot more diversity than that. Our neighbors are not monoliths. There's plenty of people whose voices are not being heard in their local representation. And so that's the effect of, okay, you're sitting at a table and you wanted Hawaiian, but your table voted for meat lovers, so you've just got to sort of shut up and cross your hands and eat the meat lovers pizza, right? It's not a great feeling, but when we have PR, we recognize that there's this diversity across all of the tables, and we've got a lot more in common than we have apart. Imagine if instead of having 92% of the representatives from Alberta being conservative, imagine if it was 63% of representatives. Imagine if we had, instead of 2 Liberals and 1 NDP, imagine if we had 12 progressive MPs from Alberta to represent a more diverse picture of the Albertan population to the rest of the country. This is, we very often see maps like this published after an election that show, this is the blue zone of the country, this is the red zone, here's the Bloc Québécois, this whole area up here is NDP, this whole area is Liberal, that's it. But if you actually divide each province, like if we had proportional representation, you'd see there's much less polarization than we think. We find in First Past the Post, it's a system with winners and losers. You were either a winner at your table with the pizzas or you were a loser. Exclusion, opposition, that's what we get under First Past the Post. I want to take a few minutes to talk about the alternative vote, the ranked ballot. It's a question about whether this is better or not, and whether it's something worth fighting for. I want to make the case that this is not something that is worth fighting for, and that we should not join campaigns to support this. We should not focus our organizational efforts on it. In a logical sense, yes, it is better than the current system. It's a small step forward, but strategically for workers' movements, we need to make sure that we're not celebrating this as a win in any way or pushing for it. So it's basically the same system, but instead of a single X, you go 1, 2, 3, 4. As I said, lower house, the House of Representatives in Australia uses this system. The pros and cons. The pro is that it is sincere. It removes strategic voting. You can very clearly say, I am an NDP voter first, I'm a Green Party voter second, I'm a Liberal Party voter third, and I'm a Conservative Party voter last, instead of feeling like you need to vote strategically and jump straight to Liberal. Or whatever order that is for you. I'm just using the most common example here. But the cons of the alternative vote are still all the same of first past the post. It's just a surface change. It placates the populace. It makes you feel like your vote is being listened to because you get to vote sincerely. So you don't have to do that mental math before an election. So you feel better, but that's just at the surface level. Dig deeper. Not all votes are equal. So what we see in Australia is that for somebody's entire lifetime, they could vote. We don't have an NDP in Australia, so it would just be like Green, then the Labor Party, and then Conservative for 20% of voters. People can vote that way all their life and yet never have their first preference vote count ever. It's just like the current situation where the only vote that counts would be that second vote anyway, the strategic vote. So it creates a voter inequality. Some voters get their first preference votes counted, and some voters will have their second preference votes counted their whole life long. You still have up to 49.9% vote waste. And vote waste is when I asked you to raise your hand and say who at the table got the pizza that they voted for, and less than half of you put up your hands. The alternative vote only raises that to a maximum of 50%. You never get more than 50%. And it reinforces a two-party system continuing to exclude minority voices. So here, it's still a winner-take-all system. Here's an example from one particular division in Australia, the seat of Higgs. The first preferences in this riding were 23% Green, 28% Liberal, 28% Labor, and 41% Liberal. But the Liberal Party in Australia are the Conservatives here. They're neoliberals, so don't get confused. We can just call them green, red, and blue. And you can see that if it had been first past the post and people had not voted strategically, the Conservatives would have won this seat with 41% of the vote. But what happened here is that first the other minor parties in that black wedge, they were eliminated, and then those votes redistributed. And then the Greens were eliminated and those votes redistributed. And it ended up on two-party preferences. So as if we'd all voted strategically between two parties, being 52% to 48%. And they still ended up with a Liberal representative, even though only 28% of those voters would have chosen Liberal as their first preference vote. So marginally better than the current system, but it still reinforces, it ultimately just comes down to the two major parties, because you're still dividing the population up into these tables and giving them only one pizza, not more diversity of choice. So is it better than first past the post? Maybe not. It's a red herring. It's not worth putting our time into. Any questions about the alternative vote and ranked ballot? There's a lot more on the Fair Vote Canada website if you want to dive into it. They've got blogs and explainers. I might actually pull up the Fair Vote Canada website and give you all a tour before we finish the session, because there's just immense amounts of resources there that you can use to teach yourself some of the details about systems. Here's a list of all the countries that use proportional representation. 45% of all countries in the world, including most of the OECD. The number of people who would have raised their hands for did you get served the pizza that you wanted in Sweden, Norway, New Zealand would have been over 90%. In Canada, it's about half. In PR, all majorities are earned. If you have a majority government outright, it means that more than 50% of the population voted for you. Very low vote waste. Every vote counts equally every time. Every riding matters equally. Every voter matters equally. Regions show their diversity. A culture of collaboration and inclusion. You are represented and there's no policy lurch. Okay. The cons of proportional representation, why haven't we done it yet? Back to Dawn's question. It's maybe a little bit more complex for people to understand if our whole country has been soaked in first past the post for our entire lives and we need to learn something new. That's hard. Which proportional representation model should we use? And it's not how we've always done things. But I know that as union members, you know that the way that we've always done things is not necessarily the best way. And we've got a room full of people here who are ready to fight and to stand up and to push for better because we deserve better. In proportional representation, everyone wins. It's about inclusion. It's about diversity. Every single bill that gets passed needs and has real majority support, and parties learn to cooperate over time. But what type of proportional representation? Here's a couple of different ballots. Mixed member proportional. You get 2 votes. The first vote, you mark an X to say this is the person I believe would best represent my district. And then the second vote that you get is for the person from the party that you feel would best represent your values. So you could say either I want to vote for, let's say I'm a progressive conservative, you could put an X there to say I vote for the Conservatives, I don't really care which candidate they are. Or in an open list system, you could say, actually, I particularly like Thomas Reid of the Conservatives, so I'm going to put an X right there. And then all of those go into, so you still have a local representative in mixed member proportional, but the overall outcome of the election through a little bit of math, the way they do it, Germany, New Zealand, works out proportionally. The single transferable vote in the Australian Senate, you can vote in one of 2 ways. It's your choice, depending on how precise you want to be. You can either place an X in one and only one of the spaces above the line to indicate the party that you support, or you can number all of the boxes below the line in your order of preference. And in Australia, I think if you vote below the line, you're required to name up to 5 candidates, or it has to be at least 5 candidates for your vote to count. And so there's this precision, and that's if you support people from different parties, for example. It's a little bit more mathematically complex. Yes?
How many % of the vote are rejected using that way?
It's still probably only minimal. It'd be like 3%. But what we see is when voters are given a choice between put an X above the line or number all the boxes below the line, 95% of voters put just one X above the line. And so then they're basically deferring to the party's lists of preferences. So I think STB is too complicated for Canada to implement and to understand. There are some people who love it. If it somehow got, support from some, body that was tasked with designing a specific system for Canada, I would absolutely be 100% behind it and support it because of the principle of solidarity. But if I was the person choosing, I would probably choose mixed member proportional. This is also ranking the candidates within a region could also be appropriate for urban environments within Canada. So in Toronto, it's sort of wild that they have 30 different ridings for each different neighborhood, right? People don't, and even here in Charlottetown, we've got at the provincial level, I think 6 different ridings. It's not like people in Parkdale don't know and have relationships and are in the same community as people the next street over in the Hillsborough neighborhood. There has been a model proposed for Canada called rural-urban proportional representation, where for urban areas, they basically take the urban seats and they say, okay, you've got to elect 10 members at large to represent the city. And so there's proportionality within the city, but then regionally you still have more geographically divided ridings. And so it's a combination or a hybrid model between single transferable vote and mixed member proportional. Dual member proportional, I'm quite partial to it. I championed it here in 2016. You still place a single X, but each party can nominate either just one candidate or two candidates. And in the end, your district has two candidates, and they could end up being from the same party if your district votes like 60 or 70% for the same party, or your district, which would be twice as large as it is now, could end up having two different representatives from two different parties. And so there's proportionality for the whole system, but there's also more diversity of local representation. If you're not getting the results you want from one of your elected members, you can go to the other one who might be from a different party. I really love this quote. Electoral systems are rarely designed. They are born kicking and screaming into the world out of a messy and incremental compromise between contending factions battling for survival, determined by power politics. Whatever system we get for Canada is very unlikely to be the result of a really sensible, deliberative process. We've had really sensible, deliberative processes recommend systems for Canada before, but they've all been rejected by the current political establishment. The one that we get is going to be the one that is supported by at least one of the two major parties. I think the NDP and Greens and even the Bloc Québécois are right there, and they're saying, yep, this is a change that we want, but we need one of the two major parties to get on board, and I'll take whatever they can give us as long as it's actually proportional and it's not the alternative vote, which will just entrench the two-party system and make it seem like they did something. Okay, I've got not enough time to go into all of this, but there's lots of criteria that basically every single proportional representation satisfies these. It's fair, strong legislature, governing stability. It has policy stability, better policy performance, better representation for women and minorities and people with disabilities and racial minorities. This tracks in country after country. Higher voter participation and turnout, better collaborative politics. Any proportional representation system will deliver all of those things, but there are differences in some of the more nuanced criteria. And which PR system you personally support, it depends on which criteria are most important for you. The degree of voter control, the degree of simplicity versus complexity, the degree of local geographic representation versus sort of broad at-large representation, the direct accountability of specific representatives and the ability to punish certain individuals for not representing their riding correctly, how resistant they are to gerrymandering or manipulation of borders. That's generally not something we need to worry about in Canada because we have very independent redistricting commissions. The degree of sincerity. There's some strategic voting that happens in some proportional representation systems, but it's a very small factor rather than a huge factor like it is currently. The degree of support for independent candidates versus reliance on political parties. Some PR systems are very supportive of independent candidates. Others make it quite difficult for someone who's not backed by a political party to participate. But the current system also makes it very different for independents to participate. The degree of it being tried and tested. Has it been implemented in multiple countries, or is it brand new and designed for Canada? And should we take a gamble on it? How quickly are the results known? On election night, do we still get the result by 10 o'clock that night, or do we have to wait 5 days for all of the calculations to be done? It took about 10 days in Australia under the alternative vote for about 4 riding results to come through. How strong are the parties? versus how much fragmentation into different factions can we expect, and how precise is the voting, which is a whole other. So these are all different factors, but they're minor factors compared to which family overall should we be choosing. What type of proportional representation? You ask 3 different people to study it, they will reach 3 different conclusions. The important thing is that whatever comes out as a recommendation, even if it's not your favorite, stand in solidarity and support any outcome that has consensus. The last federal election, we know what this is a poll 1 year previously. We know what the results were. The results, looked like this. It was actually weirdly proportional because all of the third parties and smaller got squished down, and so we had 44% voted for the Liberals, 41% for the Conservatives, and as we know that the Liberals did not get a majority. They were one seat short, at the expense of that diversity of representation, the third, fourth, fifth parties. 1 year before the election, this is what the polls were saying. Even 2 months before the election, this is what the polls were saying. 41% of the vote for Conservatives, which is the same result as they got on election night, would have resulted in 100% of the power and an absolute majority Conservative government. That was the risk that we were running. Yeah. And I know that 41% of the population would have been really happy with that, but 59% would not have been. And therefore, in that month before the election and with the new Liberal leader, the votes coalesced, and it was very close. And those 16,000 votes could have shifted, could have still ended us up in that situation. So we can't rest just because we've avoided a worst case scenario, just because we've just narrowly avoided a sort of Trump-like, Maple MAGA situation. We can't rest, and the risk is always there as long as we have a first past the post system. That an extreme faction and people on the right, there are Conservatives who support proportional representation too, because they're just as afraid that people on the extreme left, I'm not sure if they mean me, but people could capture the Liberal Party, and then the Liberal Party could capture control, and then we have this extreme left agenda. It's a risk to people on both sides of the aisle that first past the post keeps risking producing these absolute majorities that people are afraid of. So the opportunity for change in this moment. We know in the last 10 years, in 2015, they said this is going to be the last election under first past the post. There was that anyone but Conservative, anti-Harper vote. People encouraged strategic voting, and it worked. There was a Liberal majority government. Many Canadians felt relieved. And many Canadians also, to give sort of credit and respect to the Conservative voters, many Conservatives felt silenced after 2015, and they felt rejected, and they felt alienated by the results of that election, because that's what our system does. It creates winners and losers. And when we create losers in a political system, we create alienation. We create Western alienation. We create separatist movements. We create the sort of anger and resistance that we saw in the truckers' convoy, for example, of people feeling unheard. That's what happened in 2015. They struck the Electoral Réforme Électorale Committee, ERRE, but then the government just rejected the committee's report after all of the work that had been done. It was the most spectacular broken promise. Because that promise was broken, Fair Vote Canada and others started pushing for the idea of a citizens' assembly, which is a mechanism for decision-making that's been used successfully in many other countries. We're not very successful at running them here because we can't seem to get the idea that they need to be nonpartisan. But ultimately, implementing any recommendations resulting from a citizens' assembly still requires agreement from one of the two major parties to have enough votes in the legislature to implement it. And we also saw in that time frame the Liberal membership supported the idea of proportional representation at the grassroots level, but not at the leadership level. polling that was done in January of this year. Do you support or oppose moving towards a system of proportional representation in Canadian elections? This is a huge opportunity. 68% of Canadians support proportional representation when asked. 19% oppose. 13% don't know in that survey. Mark Carney has said, when he was asked about it in April, he said there may be a point where we've advanced on other immediate pressing priorities, the trade negotiations and tariff crisis with the US, particularly the economic crisis, that more structural issues in our democracy can be addressed. So basically saying, this is important maybe later. He's also said he doesn't think it would be appropriate for a prime minister to have their thumb on the scale, by which he means pushing for a specific model of reform. We know that Justin Trudeau wanted ranked ballots. He did not want proportional representation. He was trying to use that idea that it would be the last election under first past the post to say, look, I achieved reform. It was a ranked ballot, and that was it. But Carney is saying, I wouldn't have my thumb on the scale. I'm open to it. It's just not my current priority. If it's not his priority within 1 or 2 years, then the next election is going to be under first past the post as well, right? If we want to see change on this, we have to push hard and now in the first half of their term so that we can have some work done to define a system, and then it can be implemented with enough time for Elections Canada to make it happen before the next election. Which voters back proportional representation? Voters in every single party. 72% of Liberals, 80% of Greens, 87% of Greens, 83% of the NDP, 77% of People's Party of Canada Libertarians support proportional representation. 3/4 of the Bloc, and 54% of Conservatives. Because there are a lot of Conservatives in Toronto who don't feel represented. There are a lot of Conservatives on the island right here who do not feel represented. We've only had one Conservative MP for the island in the last 20 years. Gail Shea up west. It's been wall-to-wall Liberal on the island for a long time. So there's strong Democratic support, and I think the grassroots work has been done over the years. The grass tops work is where it needs to happen. The push from the grassroots needs to get to the decision makers in each of these parties. Polarization has become a growing feature of Canadian politics. US-style culture war topics have become more prominent. We are heading either in the direction of the US with a two-party system, or we're heading towards, if we can implement proportional representation and get it done, more diversity, more stability, more progress. The top 20 democracies in the world, 18 of them use proportional representation, and neither the US nor Canada are in the list of the top 20 democracies in the world. We've got work to do, and we can do it. In the OECD countries, our average voter turnout is right down the bottom, 62.3%. In France, it's even worse. But in all the countries with proportional representation, the voter turnout heads up towards 85%. Why would you vote in a system that you know is going to ignore your vote? There's a huge amount of cynicism in Canadian politics, and proportional representation represents a huge opportunity that we have to revitalize interest in Canadian politics and to make individual voters feel like, in fact, their vote does matter. It will matter. You will be listened to. You will get the representation you want. So that's it. And I just realized it's 10:30, which means I did speak for the whole hour. Damn it.
Does anybody have any questions for Anna?
Question here.
Rosa?
Mr. Carney, do you know what would be the cost to go to that type of vote? Because, they're thinking about money always.
Yeah.
So do you know what would be the shifting in doing that type of election?
Well, I know that Mark Carney likes to talk about investments and operational costs, ongoing operational costs. The transitional cost would be significant, but ultimately it's minor, because once you put it in place, it's like building a bridge. It's there, every day for the next 80 years. And so the cost is like, $1 a car that goes over its lifetime. The main cost is way, way back at the start. Remember when I was talking about policy lurch? Like, what is the cost of all of this to the country? It's huge. Yeah, it's immense. It is millions. It is billions of dollars per year. This is the cost. And so if we want to talk to Carney and speak his language about investing now to make long-term changes that will support our economy, keep us stable and grow over the long term, it's policy lurch. That's the thing that we've got to remember. The cost of changing all the time. This is the biggest cost of first past the post. Excellent question. Please do. I don't want to start your day off by going 15 minutes over, but I will just show you the Fair Vote Canada website, if it loads, which it will. Fairvote.ca. It's also disponible en français. And you've got like blogs here that talk about recent occurrences, hour-long webinars that can dive into specific electoral systems, campaigns that are currently active federally or in Ontario, and in New Brunswick, municipal elections, Quebec, le Mouvement démocratique nouvelle in Quebec, different details, fun facts, details on rural-urban proportional, a lot of research and evidence on the impacts on the economy, climate change, health, women and diversity, inequality, cooperation, resources if you are a classroom teacher and you want to talk about this in your grade 9 civics class, handouts that you can print, all sorts of things, information about how to get involved, etc. Fair Vote Canada will be putting the call out for people to go and meet with their MPs over the summer. And I hope that all of you will be involved in that call, that you'll organize a delegation to go and meet with your representative to ask for this. I think that is what it will take. We're done with petitions at this time. We need to go and engage and be in those relationships to get the decision-making on electoral reform higher up the priority list of the decision-makers at the top of every political party in Canada, so that we can finally translate this huge support at the grassroots into reform. And I'm tremendously excited, not only about the opportunity for Canada, but if Canada does this, what happens to the UK, what happens to Australia, and what happens to the US? If we do this now, then the US could follow maybe 20 years later, but it would shape the arc of history far beyond our borders for decades to come.
Any more questions for Anna? Sean?
Just quickly, so the leadership of the Conservative Party is basically against proportional, and they probably always will be. The leadership of the Liberal Party, they make all the promises in the world and they're just going to lie about it forever. So we shouldn't expect anything from them. But it's kind of disheartening to see two NDP governments now at the provincial level who are in power, who have majorities, who could implement this but aren't.
That's true.
And that's really disheartening. What about the countries that have switched from first past the post to proportional, such as New Zealand? I think they did it about 25 years ago.
That's right.
What and a couple of other countries in the OECD, what worked about, I'm sure you've studied this, and Fair Vote has studied this, what worked about that campaign and their successes in switching to proportional?
Yeah. So
what did they do?
So in New Zealand, they made the decision, they studied the issue, they got the evidence. There have actually been 15 studies in Canada since 1921 that have recommended switching to proportional representation. Yeah. So the studies have been done, but they just had a government that had the guts to make the change. And in New Zealand, they said, we're going to make this switch, and then in 2 election cycles, once the country has some experience, then we're going to have a referendum. It's a bad idea to have a referendum off the bat, because then you open the door for disinformation. We had a referendum here in 2019 following up on the plebiscite, and they gave $75,000 to both sides, and the no side used that money to put up billboards all over the province saying, if you don't know, vote no. It was just a fear-mongering campaign. It was the same conservative strategists as are behind Stephen Harper and all of that who came to PEI and did a fear-mongering campaign. And populism won the day. We lost by only 1 percentage point there. So referendums, I don't think are a great way to make that change. We need deliberative processes. But I love the way of implement and do a confirmatory referendum two election cycles after. And what was it? There was one other point that I had, but I lost it. So
About New Zealand or?
New Zealand. Oh yeah, I was just going to say, no country that has ever changed to proportional representation has ever gone back to first past the post. Like, no one's fighting for first past the post. Once it's gone, it's gone. So let's do it.
Any other questions for Anna? Anna, thank you very. Oh, sorry, Teddy.
Sorry, I just want to thank you very much for. Oh, I'm not going to steal the thank you, but thank you for the presentation. It was really great. I think that it's very. Obviously, like first past the post is like the worst version of. Maybe the worst version of first past the post is like a two-party system, but then within first past, like this is not great. If you could think of all the other kinds of quote-unquote democracies we might be able to have. One thing I wanted to say, it's more of a comment, but it's also, I think in this context, a bunch of union people, I think it's worth saying, which is that I think that right now what we're seeing is a lot of changes happening for decades to people's quality of life, to the social programs that are available, to all the kinds of things that you want a stable government and a stable country to have. Mm-hmm. People are feeling this for real. Yeah. And so naturally, as a consequence of this, there's a new opportunity and openness to change. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, what comes with this is sometimes change in the negative and also change in the positive. Mm-hmm. So in my opinion, we're seeing lots of versions of this going on. It makes sense for a question about proportional representation to be part of this conversation. Mm-hmm. The point I'm trying to make, though, and I think from a union perspective, in my opinion, it's worth thinking about it in this way, is that there have been times where we had first past the post and things were better than this. Yes. And there are countries and whole groups where there is more of a proportional representation, and you still have this neoliberal onslaught, austerity onslaught. So the point I'm trying to make right now is not to say, let's go back to the good old days of a better first past the post. Not at all. The point I'm trying to make is that if we're trying to look at making life better for ourselves and and taking on the dynamics of power, first past the post is proportional representation is a tool for that, but it's not a panacea, and it also can be. I think we should be cautious around over expecting what we can get out of that without also doing simultaneous work in challenging that kind of power structure.
100%.
You know, and I'm not saying you disagree with this, but I just think
I think it's a beautiful
keeping that
point.
in matters.
There are countries with first past the post with proportional representation who still have authoritarian, libertarian, anti-regulation governments that are hurting people, and
the planet,
and the planet and everything, and first past the post adds an extra barrier, but knocking down that barrier does not mean that there aren't other barriers. And what it does do is it makes our political movements stronger, rather than having this cycle where we see we've just had it happen. Where most of our progressive parties with more diverse voices have been decimated this last election, and they're going to have to do so much work internally to rebuild themselves. So it removes that barrier, but there is always more work to be done. So, thanks.
With that, thank you very much, Anna.
Thank you so
On
much.
behalf of the Confederation of Canadian Unions for coming out today, it was an awesome presentation.
Thank you.
And I think we will be contacting you very soon.
Very good. Awesome. Yeah, feel
Thank
free
you.
to reach out. You can find me on, Facebook and social media and all of that, or email me. Dawn's got my contacts. So.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.